Hello everybody and welcome to this week's video. It's a continuation in the series on what 2017 teaches us about 2018 onwards in the AQA English Literature exams. Now, we're looking at Paper 2 Section B in this video. Hopefully you've watched the previous videos. So obviously Paper 2 Section B is the anthology poetry section, the scene poetry section. Obviously you don't get the anthology with you, but one of the poems is printed and you compare it to a different poem. Now, how to answer this question is something that I've covered in my other videos in the GCSE English Literature playlist. I'm not going to teach you how to answer the question in this video. All I want to do is talk to you about the sort of common mistakes people made, the things that came up in the examiner's report. So the first thing, and it's probably no surprise, but the first thing that was very evident was that often the quality of a student's response depended on the choice of second poem. Now, you are given one poem and you choose a poem to compare to it. But what the exam board have fed back is that although it is possible to compare any of the poems, there are certainly some poems which compare better than others. And you know, in my literature playlist, there's a video on which poems compare well, and I talk about this in that video. So let me give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say that the power and conflict question was about poems that present the true horror of war. Now, if you were thinking about that, you think, okay, well, the war poems are probably the best ones to write about. You know, Charge of the Light Brigade, Bayonet Charge, Exposure, maybe Remains, you know, because they are literally about the effects of war. Some students, and this is just a sort of hypothetical situation, but I'm explaining the point. Some students would think, okay, the effects of war. I'm going to write about Ozymandias, and I'm going to look at the effects of war in a metaphorical light and talk about the war between power and nature. And interpret the idea of war in that way. Or I'm going to write about London, which, you know, has again that sort of conflict within it, and the occasional reference to war with, you know, the blood running down palace walls and that kind of thing. And what the exam board have fed back, you know, no surprises, is that the best responses tended to be those that chose a second poem which really did cover the topic of the question. Now, there are two ways of looking at this. There are a number of students, I'm sure, who didn't know all of the poems, perhaps, you know, just knew, you know, Ozymandias and kind of thought, I'm going to compare that, whatever the question is. And that is something that is absolutely not recommended. The other way that, you know, this might have happened is students might have thought, well, I imagine everyone's going to answer the question this way, so I'm going to look at how to answer it a little bit differently. I'm going to interpret the question metaphorically. It is possible to do that, and it is possible to get a very good grade doing that. But I would say that the experience of the first year of the exams is that those students tended to struggle, and it's better to choose a second poem that makes a lot of sense, but the actual points you make in answering the question to be very sophisticated. The second point comes down to the comparison. There's no discrete assessment objective that now assesses comparison in and of itself. And what that means is there's no way that you have to compare. So you don't have to write one paragraph about how something is done in one poem and then the next paragraph about how it's done in the second poem. You can write a full analysis of one poem and then your comparative analysis of the second poem to come, you know, completely after that. There's no formulaic approach to comparison. And once again, we see this all the way through these exams, really. You know, the exam board are feeding back that perhaps if you are a middle or lower ability student, a formulaic approach that's taught to you might be useful because, you know, so many people say, well, look, you know, I need a formula to answering these questions, else I don't know what to do. But it's all about answering the question. And what the examiner's report sort of picked up on was the fact that you will be rewarded marks and levels for how you've connected the two poems in the light of the question itself, the specifics of the question. So whether you choose to do that in that kind of, you know, back and forth paragraphing or complete analysis or whatever it is, it's all about answering the question. And that brings us on to something that I've talked about exhaustively. If you watch my Student Exemplar series, I talk about this in pretty much every video, which is that the best responses pursued a line of argument, a hypothesis, an idea, a theory. And this is something I explore in my revision guide, which you can pick up now in paperback on Amazon for £6.99 or ebook £3.99. But basically what we're talking about is that there is a risk with poetry. I've seen it as a teacher and in my years as an examiner, that what seems to happen with poetry more than anything is that students write the things they remember about the poem. So you might sort of have this really clever idea about the dactylic dimeter in Charge of the Light Brigade, and as a result, students write about it, whatever the question. You have to remember that the specifics of the question are the most important thing. And a line of argument is a theory, a hypothesis, which you have that you explore in your answer. So rather than writing 4 or 5 isolated points, you actually have a theory. So that theory could be that the two poems present man as powerful through their use of language, however they use structure and form to undermine that presentation of power. And then you spend half your answer looking at how language is used to present power, and half your answer looking at how structure and form undermine that presentation of power. It's a hypothesis, a theory, a line of argument. So really important to point out, then this is something I pointed out before the exam, that the highest marks are awarded to those students who have that line of argument. I hope you found this video useful. Please do pick up a copy of the revision guide and give the video a thumbs up.